Hi, everyone. Welcome to Here We Are, Brattleboro's Community Talk Show. I'm Wendy O'Connell, and my guest today is Richard Wizansky. Richard has been in this community for over 50 years, starting out in 1968 at the Total Loss Farm in Guilford. He became an English literature professor, a Vermont Humanities Council Scholar, and he runs Bold Moves Consulting, which advises nonprofits on fundraising. So here we are today with Richard. And hello, Richard.
Hi, Wendy. How are you?
Good. It's great to see you.
Thanks for inviting me on.
Oh, I'm very happy to have you on. I know you have a lot of stories to tell, and you know, anyone who's been in this community for as long as you and I have can talk at length about how great this community is and the various cool things that you have done. You started out in Boston. You are a Boston native, and you were in the West End of Boston?
Yeah, I grew up in the West End, which was a very interesting, dynamic community, a very poor community. I always say I grew up in the slums, but what was fascinating and dynamic about it was that it was a wonderful immigrant community. It was a community that had a lot of Jews, a lot of Italians. Our tenement, in fact, that I lived in, we lived on the third floor, and there was a fire escape as a Jewish family, and there was a fire escape, a very narrow fire escape, which led to the apartment next to us, and that was an Italian family, where the De Benedictis family, where the dad, Tony De Benedictis, came from Sicily rather, and the mom, Ida De Benedictis, came from Naples. And so those two urban centers are known not to get along very well. And so we used to enjoy hearing the arguments in Italian through the walls. It was also a community where there were a lot of displaced persons, what were called, and I think a kind of not nice way, DPs, but that's what they were called. They had been displaced by the Second World War. But it was a very thriving community of narrow streets and tenement buildings where you had the butcher shop and the fruit shop and the bakery all separate. And I remember my mother giving me a nickel to run to, a number of blocks actually to get a pumpernickel bread sliced, it had to be, at Silver's Bakery on Spring Street, where in fact my father had his own kosher butcher shop before I was born. Yeah. So it was, when you think about sort of the 19th century, mid-19th century, it was very much of a mid-19th century community and hadn't changed very much until it did get irrevocably changed in 1953, I believe, when urban renewal came in and tore the whole thing down to build high-rise luxury apartments. And it was basically the first major urban renewal disaster in the United States.
Yeah, really, it was. I didn't realize that Boston was one of the first ones. Yes, and so that changed the whole tenor of the neighborhood and who you were elbow to elbow with and growing up with.
Yeah, we were evicted, basically. We were deported to Dorchester, or as we called it in Dorchester, Dorchester. And so that's where my parents lived, and that was more of a much more middle class neighborhood that I grew up in.
Did you have siblings?
I do. I have 2 brothers and a sister. Oh. As a matter of fact, I've just been talking to my brother today. He was at Mass General Hospital, which was right next to where we grew up in the West End. That's one of the only buildings standing. And of course, it's had amazing development, but he has COVID and he's in the hospital.
Oh, there you go.
So that's a sign of the times.
It is, yes, it comes closer to home. We've been very lucky in Vermont. And
we have.
Yeah, we have. So you grew up there, and your dad had been a kosher butcher, and you were in public school, elementary school.
I was in elementary school. There's one of the schools that I went to in the West End actually are still standing.
Any teachers or influences during that time that stand out for you that you've carried along with you?
Oh, we have to talk about Miss Vitti.
Miss
Miss Vitti
Vitti.
was my Miss Vitti was my fifth grade teacher. Um, she was a Southern, very attractive woman, as I recall. She had a very strong Southern accent. And I was a very good writer and talker, and Miss Vitti was very encouraging of me to continue my writing, encourage my writing. Used to schlep me around to other classes to read what I had written,
Oh
which was
my.
kind of embarrassing, and also called me her sugar plum.
Sugar plum. Sugar plum. There's a nickname that could stick.
I hope not. We've been there and we've done that. We're not there anymore.
That's pretty.
But she was a marvelous inspiration, because it's so important when you're that age.
Yeah.
And I was in the fourth grade, so I must have been 10 or something, to have such very strong encouragement and confidence in you.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Absolutely.
so
Yes. And so you ended up at BU, Boston
yes,
University, and there you actually, unbeknownst to you, perhaps started forming a cohort that would actually follow you through your life.
right. And it's really amazing about that. And we were at Boston University. Um, when I was accepted, I was encouraged to go into what was called the Division of General Education. And that was basically a great books program. And the recruiters were, um, I, I can tell from retrospectively, we're putting the hipper, more beatnik kids, young people into that program. So in that program, many of that program ended up in Brattleboro or in Guilford, who went through that program. So we went through that program in 2 years, studied Western civilization, um, patriarchal civilization, of course, because those were the days, and it
Yes,
was
they
all
were.
white and all men, of course. But I mean, we started with the Greeks, and we studied Greek philosophy, Greek art, Greek literature, Greek music, and that's just one example. But we went through the history of civilization from
Uh-huh.
the beginning of Greek times to the present, which at that time was the late 60s. So it was a very interesting program, but it attracted um, very wonderful people like Don McLean, who lives in Guilford now, Miranda Porch, who lives in Guilford, and many of those people came to establish the commune here in Guilford in 1968. And Don, and the way we found the land to have the commune on is that Don um, had a hunting cabin here on the road for many years before 1968, and he was coming up here one day and said, and saw a for sale sign of of the Franklin farm,
Hmm.
which and that was the farm that we ended up buying on a 10-year mortgage for $226.10 a month.
Oh my gosh. Isn't that just incredible?
86 acres, yeah.
That's incredible. And there are folks still living on the farm. Many of you are in a very close surround to the old farm. And you actually were farming.
Oh yes, we came to. I don't think we knew it when we got there, but we knew that we had to do it when we got there because, I mean, we needed to survive. And one of the purposes of establishing the commune was to sort of disengage from contemporary society and politics, because all of us were firmly against the Vietnam War, where we were all activists. Some of us were being investigated by the FBI for political work, but we really did not want to be in Lyndon Johnson's America. And Ray Mungo, who was amongst us, had been the editor of the Boston University News and had put up a headline that said impeach Johnson, which at the time was a great scandal.
Yes.
When we got to the farm, we needed to survive, and we survived by, and we wanted to be intentional, and we wanted to grow our own food and have our own kind of micro economy.
Yeah, yeah, yes, and you did that, and you learned a lot along the way. I'm sure. It's interesting too, isn't it, that there's so many young people coming to this area who are creating their own farms or taking over ones that have already existed. It's kind of heartening to see.
Right. I mean, we were sort of at the vanguard of what came to be called the Back to the Land movement,
That's right.
and we're in another Back to the Land movement here now in
Very
the
much so.
21st century, and in
Very,
Guilford too. There are a number of farms where young people have come to establish, CSAs and organic farming
yes.
operations.
Yeah, I
It's
know.
very exciting.
It is. It's a great thing to see. And during this time as well, you at some point you got your a master's degree, and you went on to do a thesis at UMass. And so you were kind of in between two different kinds of worlds.
When we came to the farm in 1968, that summer, we came here in July of '68. I had been accepted to Tufts on a full scholarship to get a PhD, actually, in American literature. I got my master's degree, but not my PhD.
Mhm.
So I was commuting back and forth, not every day, but many days during the week. It's funny. I used to take my little Volkswagen Bug,
Of course.
which my dear friend Lori the bumper fell off the back, and he had put a log on the back for a bumper.
And during that time, Richard, you were also writing, and you were writing poetry, and so that's been definitely a thread through your life.
That's right. I wish I were writing more poetry now. Now that I'm retired, I'm planning to return to it. But
Yes.
I have been writing. I wrote an essay for the Print Town book that's coming out in Brattleboro.
Yes.
Uh,
The Brattleboro
in,
Words Project.
in the
Yes.
Brattleboro Words Project,
Mhm, mhm.
and several other pieces that I've written for various magazines. And I'm trying to get back to poetry.
Well, it's a good thing to get back to.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
I read a lot of poetry.
Do you?
Yeah,
Yes. Yes. It takes an amount of attention and reflection to
absolutely.
get back into that world. And so you were. Let's talk a little bit about teaching, because you did a good amount of teaching after you got your master's and did your thesis.
Yeah. So when I got my master's at Tufts University, and then I came back, permanently on the farm, and I got an appointment at Greenfield Community College to teach in the English department, where I was for 15 years. I
And
loved teaching.
yeah,
Yeah.
I was just going to say, you enjoyed teaching, didn't you?
Yeah, I had always wanted to be a teacher. In fact, when I was a kid, I would be in my room, I was supposed to be doing my homework, but I would be having an imaginary classroom where I would be giving lessons.
So that brings us to you being a Vermont Humanities Scholar.
That's correct.
And you did that for
And that's
35
a great deal of fun and challenging too.
years.
Um, The Vermont Humanities Council has a number of programs. One of the programs they have is a program where um, what they call scholars, who are scholarly experts in a field, and they, for the council, facilitate discussions, mostly in libraries, literary discussions of
Mhm.
books. And so I've been doing that for, I don't know, 35 or 40 years.
Wow.
And I actually started at Brooks Memorial Library, where my partner, Joanne Hayes, she was my partner in doing these programs. We actually developed a number of programs for the council, which are still in the catalog today.
Obviously, you've done a lot of reading and teaching, and you must have some favorites. I know that I have a top 5 that keeps changing over the course of my life. So if you could share something similar, that would be fun.
Okay, I'll start with my traditional authors and books, but I also wanted to mention a couple of contemporary works, which I think are just super. So my favorite authors are William Faulkner, and Virginia Woolf. Those are probably the two top. Ernest Hemingway's up there as well. But I've done a lot of reading. I think I read all of Faulkner's works and all of Virginia's work. And of course, there's Walt Whitman. Mark Doty's new book on Walt Whitman is just fabulous. I have a passion and an inclination toward very rhythmical prose, very rich, deep, long sentence prose, where you can actually hear the music of the prose. So you find that in Virginia Woolf, and you find that in William Faulkner for sure. So those are some of my favorite, and of course Shakespeare. We can't leave Shakespeare out.
That's right. Got to throw him on the list, no matter what, right? Elimination spot right there.
Recently, we have a little book, a very little book club. I think there are just 6 of us, and we're all pretty literary people. And we're reading a book now called A Paragon. I think it's Apeirogon, and an aparagon is an infinite-sided polygon. And it's a novel, but it's about 2 fathers who lost 2 daughters in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. So it's about the Middle East, and it's rich and beautiful and quite experimental. Yes. And before that, we read a novel, The Murmur of Bees, which is by a Mexican female author who's, I think it's Santiago, her name is. Mm-hmm. That's also a very beautiful, very lyrical novel, which I highly recommend.
Mm-hmm. You know, Richard, through your life, at some point, I assume that you came out. So as a gay man going through from the 50s, 60s up until this time, so many things have changed. Do you feel, what's your relationship to those changes?
I'm certainly very happy about them. When you look back, I recently saw a film, the title of which I cannot remember, but about coming out in the it was Uncle Frank. It's on Netflix. Mm-hmm. That's the title of the film, Uncle Frank. And the protagonist is named Frank, and how difficult it was for him to tell his parents and his peers in the 50s and early 60s about his sexual orientation. It was very tough. It was brutal, actually. Mm-hmm. In Uncle Frank, the film, we have a scene in which his father dies. The will is read, and his father says, and for Frank, don't give that, can I swear? Don't give that son of a bitch 1 penny, because he's gone against it's unnatural, and he's gone against the order of God's kingdom. Mm-hmm. And that really summed up for me what it was like in those days. Mm-hmm. And then when we came to the farm in 68, I actually came to the farm with what we called then, he was my partner, but in those days you called your partner your lover, which we don't use that word anymore. But we were actually, even though all of the folks at the farm knew that we were together, it was never talked about. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, today, I live with my husband of 37 yeers. We had a wedding in our backyard with 100 people, a catered event, and under white tents, with serving martinis. And it was a very beautiful affair. And just that progression says so much about where we are now. There are still many LGBTQ plus people in our state and in the United States who are suffering because of their sexual orientation. Right. And we need to be actively in their court, and we need to be empathic to their suffering.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes, right here in town, we have some great organizations. Out in the Open is one of them that's doing supreme work.
Great work.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And I should add that we have a foundation in Vermont called the Samara Foundation, which the endowment was left by 2 fellows who lived up north in Vermont who died of AIDS. And their wealth has gone into a foundation. I'm on the board of the advisory board. It's now at the Vermont Community Foundation. But the purpose of that fund, the Samara Fund, is to give grants to individuals and organizations, LGBTQ plus individuals and organizations in the state of Vermont. So it's the only, one of the only really organization in Vermont that's dedicated to that purpose.
That's great.
For instance, the AIDS Project in Brattleboro has received grants. Out in the Open has received grants from the Samara Fund.
That's wonderful.
Do you know what the Samara is, by the way?
What is it?
A Samara, you know the maple leaves which twirl, the seeds which twirl down and you put on your nose? Those are Samaras. So the name stands for seeding and regrowth and whirling in the air.
And whirling, yes. There's a little ballet involved. Well, that also brings us to the fundraising part of your life and the amount of time and different organizations that you've been involved with. I know that you've worked with Next Stage and Groundworks, the Insight Photography, Marlboro College. You've been around the block with a lot of different organizations, all nonprofits. Also, the Mr. Rogers organization, which was that a while back?
That was just a few years ago. We were hired, my company Bold Moves Consulting, and I had a partner in that. I still have a partner in that company, Nancy, and we were asked by the Fred Rogers Company to come down and help them to fundraise for Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, which is the hottest children's program, I think, in the world, and certainly on educational television. The biggest, largest grant that we helped them get was from the National Science Foundation, which was a grant that was dedicated to proving the efficacy of that program in the learning of young children.
I think that and Sesame Street have sort of had, people are looking at it again in a different way and how much they did for early childhood education. One thing I know, Richard, that Total Loss Farm, there was a lot of politics involved. A lot of people were very politicized. And I know that during that time, so many people were becoming radicalized as well. And so I think it's really interesting. I know that both you and Veranda Porch, two of the founders, so to speak, of Total Loss Farm, are on the select board in Guilford now. And how is that, again, coming back? It's not a full circle kind of situation, but just to be sitting there in that seat with the wealth of experience that you have had and helping.
What's the most wonderful thing, aspect of, I'm the chair of the select board, but before I was the chair, I was a select board member, and I'm still a select board member. But the most wonderful aspect of that job, which is volunteer, is that, I just love the town of Guilford. I've loved it for 52 years, ever since I got here in July of 1968. I think it's the best town to live in the world. And so to have the privilege and the responsibility of helping Guilford to navigate the 21st century and to become a better town, a more efficiently run town, is a great pleasure and an honor for me. And so I take great delight in my work with the select board. A lot of it is before I ran for select board, a friend of mine who was on the select board in Marlboro, she said to me, "Richard, it's dogs and roads," and we do have a lot of dog and road issues, but there are other issues as well. For instance, we're facing now the fact that we probably cannot have an in-person town meeting this year because of the governor's executive orders, and so it's a very interesting project to work out how we can still have a town meeting and still have democratic representation in Vermont's unique way, which is town meeting. We still have that and make it real and make it thoughtful and make it efficient.
Yes.
And that's a project that we're working on now.
That's great. And I think it's going to be really interesting. And I would just give a shout out to BCTV, who covers so many of the select board meetings in the area. They're kind of running from one to another. This year has been quite a challenge, but they have been doing it. So people.
Yeah, we very much appreciate BCTV. They take at least almost all of our select board meetings. And that's very useful for going back and finding out what you said, and then, what you might have, not legislation, but what you might have passed during that time.
That's right. That's right. Historically, too. Yeah, it'd be very interesting. Which historically, for this year, 2020, we have the pandemic. And how has that been for you, Richard?
It's been awful. I think that we're, and given the political situation in our country, which is on top of it, uh, um, I'll be civil in talking about that. But the pandemic has been very, very hard. I mean, just today, my brother just went into the hospital in Boston, Mass General Hospital, where we grew up, and he has COVID. He's on oxygen, and that antiviral drug, I can't pronounce it, Remdesivir, and he had a very hard time speaking. So it's just been hell, and I feel economically, my partner and I are in a comfortable situation economically. We've retired, but my heart goes out to those of us who are not in a situation where where they have kids, they have to work, but they can't work. The kids are at home. I mean, I'm a guardian ad litem for the Windham County court system, and one of the young people that I am a guardian for, he just has such, he's 13. He did very, very well in school before the pandemic, but he's having a hell of a time learning how to be a remote student.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, this is very, very and hard for us all, and I can't wait for it to end.
Yes.
It's tragic, really.
Yes, and I think that there are so many things that we don't hear about that we used to hear about, either through teachers or through people who were dealing with kids in different areas of their lives. So yes, we're going to find out a lot of things after the pandemic is over. Hopefully,
We are.
we will have gotten some skills and tools to deal with that. Yes.
I think we will, and I think that American society has been changed irrevocably. I think there are going to be many ways of the way that we relate to each other, the way we relate to our government and to government institutions that are going to be very much changed.
One of the wonderful things about Zoom is that we can actually see each other. We can wear lipstick, right?
Well, I'm not wearing lipstick, but yours looks fabulous.
Very important to be able to do that and smile at people and see teeth, right?
That's right.
Yes. Richard, thank you so much. It's been delightful.
Well, thank you. It's been a great pleasure.
And thanks to everyone out there in our audience for tuning in today and listening to another local person talking about being here and being part of the community. We are a weekly show. I just want to give a shout out to everyone who is working so hard during this time, around the holidays, the end of the year, everyone who is needing food and the people who are stepping up. Everyone Eats is an amazing organization. There are many, many people who are pitching in an amazing way. So we say thank you to everyone there. I thank everyone at BCTV for making these shows possible. We are continuing to be able to be a viable TV station for the community. So again, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.